everyone. Welcome to the Man Up Already podcast. As always, super excited to be here with you. And man, it's funny. I say this every week, but I'm super pumped for this episode when the guests that we have. So last episode, phenomenal. This episode, same thing. Great guest. We're going to have a great time today. This is a unique one for sure. But before we introduce our guest and bring them up, as a reminder, the Man Up Already book is out there on Amazon. You can search that by the title. You could search it by my name, John Puritz. But it is out there on Amazon. On social, you can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn as John C. Puritz, on Instagram and Twitter as J. Puritz. And you can reach me on Telegram at John Puritz. Don't forget our great sponsor, Master Beef Jerky. Go to masterbeefjerky.com. Man, they've got incredible beef jerky. I just finished up our last bag. Got to go out and order some more. But they have an incredible product. It's funny because I've had many different types of beef jerky, and Master Beef Jerky, they talk about bold flavor and a tender bite. And it is really true. That stuff is so tender and so good. I go through it quickly. But if you go to masterbeefjerky.com, put in the coupon code MUAP, Man Up Already Podcast. Coupon code MUAP, get 20% off your order. And I'm telling you, if you're if you're shopping for beef jerky or you're just a beef jerky fan, this is the place to go. Their product is unbelievable. Look, the entire reason we have this podcast is that we believe, I wrote about it in the book, Man Up Already, but there is a moment in the Bible where Gideon, he's just this average guy, at least he thinks that, right? And he's actually hiding from the people in charge. And an angel shows up and says to Gideon, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but the angel says to Gideon, greetings, mighty warrior. And that's the first time that Gideon heard himself referred to that. And I think that's a perfect analogy or an example of what's happening with men today. How many men out there right now have no idea who they are? You are a mighty warrior. You were created for greatness. And it's really time for men to step into their place, right? That we used to be that. It's society kind of waters it down. I think there's an actual war against who men are, the divine creation and divine design of men and women. We talked about this last week, but the Growth Conference is absolutely for men. We want men walking out of there freaking empowered. We want them fired up. We want them to go home, lead in their family. Man Up Already, the book, is how to live and lead at home and in the marketplace. So if you're looking for a growth event and you're a man for 2023, get to the Man Up Already Growth Conference. More details will be coming for that as well. So let's introduce our incredible guest today. He is an attorney for over 25 years. He's handled high-profile cases here in the state of Florida and out, including first-degree murder, attempted murder, aggravated assault with a firearm, and white-collar federal fraud. He is successful in obtaining a not guilty verdict in federal court, where, guys, federal prosecutors have a 98% conviction rate. So he's super qualified to do what it is that he does. He's a guest on many national television programs as a criminal defense expert. He's also a nationally certified firearms instructor and provides defensive tactical training and concealed weapons certification. And our guest today is only one of 6 people in the country to be certified as an alumnus of the Florida Firearms Training Curriculum. He's a nationally certified instructor for pistols, rifles, shotguns for personal protection inside the home and personal protection outside the home, and refuse to be a victim. He is also a certified range safety officer. And more importantly, for me personally, he's just a good dude and a great friend. I'm super pumped to have my good friend here on the Man Up Already podcast. Give it up for Cory Strolla. My brother.
How are you, man?
I'm good, man. Super pumped to have you on the show.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, man.
Yeah, so I want to dive right in, right? So I read your bio. Everybody, kind of has a taste of who you are, but let's talk about your legal career. You and I met, gosh, it's 2015 when you and I first met.
Yeah.
And I remember you always would say, "Hey, if the police are talking to you, you need to be talking to me," right? I've always stuck
Still
in my
say it. Yeah, still say
mind. So, being a podcast, we're equipping and empowering men, and just
it.
you and I both know, right? Manhood is under attack like never before, right? We talk about on here.
Agreed.
You,
Yeah.
you take out men, you take out the warriors. You can control a society. So let's
You
start
can control
there.
a world, right? Forgetting the
Right.
society is the first step of it, man. You can control the world. Look at the Roman Empire, right? They controlled the world because they controlled who had rights and who didn't. And most of the men were taken. It was
Mm,
only kids and women that were left.
wow. So let's dive in there, Cory, because
Okay.
I mean, talk about your career a little bit. Like you've been an attorney for over 25 years now, right? So a
Yeah.
long, long
Yeah.
time on the defense side.
Well,
Um,
I started as a prosecutor. So
oh, okay.
I started as a prosecutor. Um, let's see. I actually started out a year before I ever graduated law school, trying cases for both Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office, Pinellas County, and St. Pete, where Stetson Law is, where I went. And then I was a prosecutor for almost 4 years, and that's when I went to the defense side of it. So I've been on both sides of that justice system.
And what made you make that shift over?
Oh, mostly the politics that go on behind closed doors, and the thing. I've always said this: America, we have the best justice system in the world, and it is terrible. We have a terrible justice system, and it is
Wow.
still the best, right? It is still the best in the world by far, and it is a terrible, broken system. It was when I was a prosecutor. It's even worse now. It's become so political, and you can see that. I mean, you can see that being in South Florida. You can see Central Florida, North Florida. Then you start going to Georgia, Alabama, all the way out to California. Um, I've watched judges become these individuals of fair and impartial administration of the constitutional law to, oh, I don't personally like that. That doesn't fit any agenda I would want to see. So I'm going to rule in line with my political beliefs. Man, I would say starting in the 90s, maybe there'd be one or two political activist judges at the, it was almost like unheard of, John. And then now it just seems like it's so commonplace, like it's almost expected of, oh, who's the judge? Oh, well, all right, well, it was a second district court of appeals out on the West Coast. Of course they're gonna rule that way. So, things like that. So it's scary. It really is scary.
Well, I mean, and now, look, let me just make this statement. Normally on this podcast, we're not talking typically about political events or world events. I mean, we don't dive in there, but on this one, there's no denying it. Then I want to go there. I mean, we're looking at a justice system, and you and I are of the same age. The world that we grew up in, you just said it, right? What used to be is no longer, and you
No,
don't know
yeah.
where you fall, right? Like you can't even vote with a good conscience of that the system is going to work today. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Or
So,
nor can you have an opinion without being labeled one thing or another. Like,
right.
when you and I grew up, there was moderates, and moderates were right down the middle. Now, one party's like, well, if you're not with us, you're against us. You're the far other side. I mean, it's gotten to where, and again, without going into politics, personally,
We
I've
can
been
go
no
there,
party
dude. I mean,
affiliation. Yeah, I've been no party affiliation since my kid was born, and I had to re-register when we moved with my wife. Like, I didn't want to be on the right, I didn't want to be on the left because I believed there were parts of both that I agree with. Now it's a little bit different, but you can't say that now. Like, if I sit there and say I'm a strong believer in the Second Amendment and men defending themselves and their family from harm, I'm now labeled this far right gun loving, ammo crazy Nazi. And I'm like, dude, I'm Jewish. The Nazis killed my ancestors.
right.
I'm the farthest thing from a Nazi on the planet. But hey, if you're a man and you like guns, you're a Nazi. And that's, John, it's insane. It's absolutely, the fact that you and I even have to utter those words is insane to me.
Yeah, it's very true. Well, I would like to say that This episode is not sponsored by the Jewish Federation, right? But you got 2 Jews on here.
Right. Right. And the funny thing is, like, the Anti-Defamation League probably would label me as that right-wing Nazi because I like guns, and I'm like, aren't you supposed to be like against labeling people? But that's a whole other podcast.
Let's because I wanted the focus of our time together on the podcast, and I believe honestly that you and I could have a podcast that would last easily 2 to 3 hours on the things that we could talk about here. But I want to talk about, because I think our family is a great example of this. We came from the Northeast, we moved to Florida, and obviously Florida living is very different than Northeast living, especially when you move from the New York, Connecticut area to ports, places like Port St. Lucie, or now I live in Palm Beach, Palm Bay. They're very different than like when I came down, I would come down to Palm Beach County, or Brevard County, because that's where my grandparents were. But that's where I started to see, people owning guns and kind of more outdoor living. Like, it just was foreign to me. And I remember going, I just can't see owning a gun, carrying a gun. I had never shot a gun. I don't think I shot my first weapon. Gosh, I had to be mid-40s, right before. I think
Wow.
I honestly think I was
Wow.
43 or 44 before I ever shot my first gun.
Well, I have one better than you. As you know, obviously we talked about this. You've known me for years. I'm a national firearms instructor. I trained a 73-year-old woman who had never shot a firearm in her life. And she was this Northeast major liberal, was afraid of guns, didn't like guns. And the funny thing is, she was married to this great Marine, decorated Marine. Unfortunately, he had passed away. And her kids were like, you live alone now in 2 houses in 2 different states. You should think about a firearm. And honestly, it she was shaking at first. She was petrified because of her innate fear and what she's always been told, and the fact that, up in the Northeast, these, now they call them assault pistols, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Other than a fully semi-automatic rifle, that was the second dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life with a firearm. But she was basically raised to be afraid of them, and that you don't need a gun, and if you need a gun, well, you have all these psychological issues, and you have paranoia. And now she's a 73-year-old on her own, and she had never held a gun, she had never fired a gun. And it took me 2 days of training her, but we've got her. But it's amazing. So your story is not anything that's rare or unheard of. There are people out there that are petrified of firearms because of where they're geographically located and what
Right.
that culture was.
And it's interesting to watch things change. Like, and you and I had spoken about it many years before we ever became a gun owning family. Now here we have our concealed, both my wife and I, all like my wife, daughter and I have our concealed carry, and our son will.
Love it.
But we've all been in the range, and our weapon arsenal kind of grows. It's fun. But
It does become an addiction.
yeah, it
It does.
really does.
It's like
It's kind of like
it's like a
tattoos.
tattoo. I love, yeah. And literally, I was the guy that said to my wife, I swear, I was 30 when I got my first tattoo, and I'm like, I'm just gonna get one. And my tattoo artist was like, "You'll be back in a year, John. 6 months. 6 months." I was on the phone. I'm like, USOB. He was cracking up. So yeah. So now I can't even tell you how many I have, including a full back. I mean, a full colored back piece. And it started with, I'm just gonna have one. So yeah, I tell my wife, just one more firearm, I promise. And,
Yeah.
she
But
believes me as much as I believe her.
right. So we officially, became gun owners and permit carriers after 2020, watching the riot
Mm,
is when the
yeah,
riots happened, that we were like, all right,
yeah,
things are really off. So I kind of want to focus some time there on Second Amendment
yeah.
rights, why you think it's important, why you do what you do. And I've watched you morph from your legal business into, you know, teaching others, making sure people are prepared. I had said it in the bio or in the intro that if the shit hits the fan, Corey, I'm calling you. Like you have become for me. I mean, how often do right? Hey, bud, what do you think of this? Right? Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah, a
are
lot.
you're someone I want in my foxhole. I love our connection, but you have shown the world for those that pay attention. You know what you're talking about. You're an expert. You've been in the trenches. You are a bona fide expert. It's why I'm so privileged and honored to have you on the show. So let's talk about Second Amendment rights, why it's important, and where you see, like just what you want to offer into that conversation. Let's go there.
Sure, sure. And I'll even relate it to exactly what you said is how every man should almost feel the same way to protect himself and his family. To me, it's a bare minimum. It really is a bare minimum. I don't care what you feel about guns. Our Second Amendment in this country, literally, undeniably, the greatest country to ever exist in the history of the world. We have the most freedoms and the most privileges and the best of everything. I don't forget politics and the liberal left and what their oppression. In our country, people are so oppressed they get to talk about it and cry about it. In
Right.
other worlds, right? And like Venezuela, they're oppressed. They have no weapons, no food. Their money's worth toilet paper. Like that's oppression. Not somebody hurt my feelings because they misgendered me and they didn't use my pronoun. That's a joke. To say that that's real world oppression, Americans have become so entitled and spoiled. Go to any other country in the world, and you'll see real oppression of what governments do. Like in Canada, you cannot buy, possess, sell, or transfer a firearm because of their prime minister, because their king said this is what we're going to do.
Right.
And our Second Amendment, and this is what I want to stress, John. So if people are listening, especially people that believe in firearms, believe in protecting their families, our Second Amendment is and never was about hunting and self defense. It zero. Literally, the Second Amendment was zero about that. It encompasses it now in the modern world. But our Second Amendment was literally created by our founding fathers who had just gone against a tyrannical king and government, truly oppressing the American colonies with English law, and said that will never happen again. That the people, and remember, back then we didn't have militaries like a formal army, navy, marines. The militia that it talks
Mhm.
about, a well regulated militia, was of the people, by the people, meaning 18-year-old men to 35-year-old men, because life expectancy issues. That was the militia. So let's put the Second Amendment in context. It said that every regulated person in the militia, meaning human, man, 18 to 35, shall have the right by God, not by the government. Our Second Amendment is not a government right, is an inalienable right by God, that you shall have a firearm to defend yourself against governmental tyranny on every level, and that shall not be infringed. And that's what people don't get. We hear our commander in chief, I can't even say Brandon's name, but he gets up there and he talks about deer and Kevlar vests. That is an asinine mockery of our Second Amendment. It was never about hunting. And then people talk about, well, how many bullets do you really need to defend yourself? As
As
many
many
as I
as
can
it
fit in my
takes.
gun until it stops. Right, right. And going back to your case with the riots in 2020, you have 1,000 people burning buildings, burning houses, damaging even people, going after people. You want me to have a little 5-shooter gun, and you think that's going to stop? That may even stop the first person, and then I got to worry about 999 behind of them destroying my home, my family, my children, me, everything I've worked for in life, everything the government has taxed that I own in life. So again, from this point forward, anyone who watches this podcast, please, I pray and beg of you, don't let anyone ever talk about hunting or self defense out of context with the Second Amendment. It was specifically about government tyranny and letting the militia, we the people, have the same arms that the military has to defend ourselves from tyranny, period. That's the Second Amendment. Now, of course, it does apply to self defense now through case law, and obviously hunting, you have to have certain rifles to hunt. I can't take a little 38 revolver and go hunt a moose. Good luck with that.
Right.
Matter of fact, I'd pay someone to try to watch it. That moose would trample them. And I believe it's actually illegal because it's cruelty to animals. So don't do it. But that Second Amendment is our core value for a man to protect his family and his life and his property from government tyranny. And the words cannot be any more clear. Those God given rights shall not be infringed by the government. That's our Second Amendment. And honestly, that's why I'm such a believer. And I've been in the justice system for over 25 years. Not as a prosecutor alone, but as a defense attorney, I kind of see the worst of what humans can do to each other. Not everyone in the criminal justice system is guilty. Not everyone in the criminal justice system is a bad person. But we all have human behaviors. And as we know, humans make mistakes. Humans have emotions. Humans have anger, jealousy, rage, mental illness plays into it. And I've lived a career on the worst side of that part of our society. So am I paranoid or have paranoia? No. Do I have a reasonable expectation of what the public really is like? 1,000%. I've got a better picture of it than most people. And honestly, John, if most people knew the truth about how our justice system worked and what really was out there, there would not be a single household without a firearm in it. And I believe that till the day I die.
Wow. That's a bold statement. Wow. I want people to who are listening to this to really get, Cory, that it's very easy to turn on the media and see biasness and to see an agenda, right? But you're an expert, right? I love what you said. The better part of your life has been in the trench looking on full display human behavior. And for you to be this adamant about what it means to protect your family, like you're not just someone who has an opinion. You have years and years and years of experience in the trench to be able to make the statements that you make. So I think it's
No,
incredibly important for people to get that.
yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, go pull up videos even online and watch somebody who is on narcotics get shot by police 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times and not go down. I mean, there's even in part of the training that I've done in my own career outside of the legal system, because obviously I have my legal career and then I have my firearms career that's kind of morphed because of what turned out to be a love and a passion, a hobby, has now become a second profession of mine outside of my law practice. I've been in knife trainings, I've been in hand-to-hand trainings, and we've even watched officers get killed because they couldn't get to their gun, or even if they got to their gun with 2, 3, 4 shots, that suspect was so out of it with whatever type of drug he was taking. You've got a guy on top of a cop strangling him or putting a knife in him, and now this cop is trying to fight this guy off with a knife going in his neck, and those bullets did nothing, and now he can't get to his gun, or his gun jammed, or the gun got knocked out of his hand. It's
right.
So I don't want people just to think a gun is this is the end all be all, like you see in the movies, right? In John Wick, right? No matter where he aims, it hits, and it only takes one bullet, and everybody goes down. Good luck with that. That is literally only in the movies. We don't have magic bullets. We don't have bullets that explode. Yes, you can stop a human being with one shot, but it's got to be so perfect and so precise. And when your adrenaline is up and that sympathetic nervous system kicks in and you start getting threat focused, or you get ocular deficiencies, or you get hearing occlusion where you don't hear and you don't see, you get that tunnel vision, it's a different world. I mean, I'll guarantee you, and I'll ask you this: how many times have you been at the range where, and I know you used to like CrossFit, you're big into health, I love it, God bless you for doing that, keep it up. But how many times at the range have you done 25 burpees, then try to put your gun together and hit a bullseye at 25 yards?
Yeah, no,
right?
never, right? Of course,
Right.
never.
But welcome to real life, even from 5 feet. All of a sudden, if I was 5 feet from you and I busted into your room with a knife and I'm coming at you, your eyes would dilate, your brain would freeze, you go in a fight or flight. Your heart rate goes from 65 beats a minute to 200 beats a minute. Like it's it's amazing that people don't realize what the body goes through. So I don't want to just advocate the Second Amendment and owning a firearm. I am advocating getting professional training to put you in situations like force on force, or where you activate that sympathetic nervous system, and you get your heart rate up, you get your breathing up, put your gun together, disassemble your gun, put it back together, and then try to shoot on target. It's a different world, my friend. It's not
Mm,
just standing at a static range with a target that doesn't shoot back.
right.
You put somebody on drugs coming at you, and you got your wife and kids behind you, you will probably forget to breathe for about 60 seconds. And in the beginning of my training, I would literally get done with a round of maybe 30 seconds. And you would have thought I ran a marathon. I was huffing and I realized, oh my God, I forgot to breathe. This like I'm like, I didn't run, I didn't do anything, but your heart rate goes up and you can't even take in enough oxygen. And I think that's what people have to really train, not just get the gun, but you've got to be super proficient to protect yourself and your family with it.
All right, so this is a great place to go, because I'm sitting here thinking just about our own personal experience, right? And I think we're a really good um, example of the average person out there, right? We went from
Yeah.
this belief that if I have a weapon, I'm inviting you hear this all the time, right? If I have a weapon,
Yeah.
I'm inviting trouble, right? Which I now know is complete bullshit.
Yeah.
Anything can happen anywhere at any time, right? I mean, that's that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right, right. We don't plan for it.
100%.
Anything can happen anywhere
Right.
at any time. So take us through, Cory, where you think, all right, you have no experience, don't own, like, what are the stages? Because I've realized, okay,
Sure.
great, we're
Yeah.
an owner, right? Where we go to the range, but I'm very clear that shooting at a piece of paper 5 yards away or 5 feet away is not, what is it, 5 yards? That's not helpful, right? I know that if the crap hit the fan, I don't know what to do. And anything, I think the thing that became very present is I just learned, because we have a store here in Palm Bay that's really great on education, and they're not just about gun sales. Um, I just learned what the rules really were on printing, right? And
Yeah. For
right,
carrying concealed. Yeah.
if you show your weapon, you better use it, right? Because I'm just learning kind of what those things are. But I'm saying that to say I don't know half as much as I need to know. Number one, and then two, I know we need professional training. So there's stages of this. So maybe you could
Yeah.
talk about. All right, look, you're just realizing that protecting your family, right, is really needs to be taken incredibly seriously. I don't think it's just for the times today. I think period, right? Like, it's just
Agreed.
protecting your family. I remember when I got married, I knew I could not take care of my wife and my family. I'd never been in a fight, like, and then so I studied martial arts because I wanted to be able to protect myself. But there's another level to that. So kind of take us
Yeah.
through what you think people should learn, and the stages of it.
And it's great that you brought up martial arts, because gun training is similar to that, right? In martial arts, you don't come in like Bruce Lee and you don't start at a Bruce Lee level, right? He's a master of a master of a master, and he said I'm not a master. So yeah, you call me an expert, but in my mind, I can never be an expert enough. I can never know enough. I can never train enough. Like, so we'll take you to the very bare bones bottom. Like the first day you would walk in, research firearms, research pistols that you're considering, research ammunition. Everybody has their own opinion. And the one thing I'll tell you about YouTube, because I train people all the time. I train people that have never held a firearm before to people that have been shooting for years. Matter of fact, I just trained a guy that was a former honorably discharged military police for 8 years, and his grip was completely not modernized, and was lacking in a lot of things that made him super more accurate and proficient that I showed him. His stance, everything. It was amazing. In that former life, you would think, oh, this guy was a military police officer for 8 years. This guy's John Wick. Not even close. I mean, he even laughed and was like, Cory, I forgot half of what you're telling me. And it sounds familiar, but right when it's, you don't know what you don't know. You know that saying? You
Yep.
just don't know what you don't know. So be careful when you get other people's opinions about firearms. A lot of times they're trying to sell you something. A lot of times these reviewers online were given guns for free to talk about it. And then so it's a very tricky world. I'll give you that. Buying a gun is like buying a car. Do your research first and then always consider the source of your research. But if you start seeing the same gun talked about over and over and over, like in the top two or three on every different platform, that's a good inclination of, hey, that might be a good gun. So learn about which firearm you're interested in. I personally like 9mm ammunition because it's common, it's useful, it's cheap to train. There's great self defense ammo, and it's better than 38 and 380, and it's probably just as good as 40. So it's kind of that in between. That's a good range to have a 9mm. But if you're afraid of firearms and you want to start off at the bare bottom, you buy a 22 long rifle, pistol, or rifle. And to me, that's no different than a pellet gun. Like when I shot BB guns with my kid, it had as much kick as a 22 rifle or a 20, which I mean is none, zero, almost
Right.
nothing. You know, that's what I started my 73-year-old student out with, was the 22. And after 4 hours, she was shooting a 9mm Glock 19 and hitting steel at 25 yards away with a red dot optic. And this is a woman that would have never known any of what I just said to you until that day. So educate yourself, please educate yourself on what's out there and what you may like. There's certain features you may like. A lot of beginners want an external safety on a gun. I don't carry anything with an external safety, but that's just me. Because, you know, and as you learned, what's the number one rule of gun safety, right? What's the number one rule of gun safety, people? Is keep your finger off the trigger at all times until you know your target, what's behind it, and you know it's a threat and you have to shoot it. So to me, I don't need that external safety. It's just something else I have to try to train to make sure I disengage to before. And in a self-defense situation, you may not have that time to even think about it when you panic, you know, because I've been in situations in training, but I've never really had somebody come at me with a real knife and try to kill me. So I assume I'm trained for it, but I won't know until I get in that situation. You know, heavens forbid I ever do.
Right.
But a great place is do your research and then get your hands on them. Find somebody who is an instructor that you can trust, not just somebody who has the bare minimum credentials. Like you go to these fairs, the South Florida Fair and stuff, and you get your concealed weapons permit for $50 and you shoot one bullet into a barrel. What on earth is that? Like, yes, that's the bare minimum. Do I do that with my students? Absolutely not. I think it's insane. But again, everybody's different. So get your hands on a good instructor, get your hands on a bunch of different kind of firearms, shoot them, see what's good for you, see what's not good for you. And then that's when you invest to purchase a firearm. I would not even invest into buying one until you've had your hands on two, three, or maybe even four different ones, and you know what's going to fit good. And what fits good in your hand, John, may not fit good in my hand. You and I may shoot identical, but have completely different styles, grips, stances, and firearms, and both hit perfect bullseyes. That's what people have to understand. Every firearm is not the same, and every person is different, plain and simple. And
Yeah.
that is the perfect starting point.
You know, and it's funny that you say that because we had gone through most of that process, and I had asked you, like, the first one I had ever shot was a Sig 9mm, and then I shot a 44 revolver, which was
That's a hand cannon.
a hand cannon, right?
Let's call it what it
Yeah.
is.
So in my mind, because it was the Sig, and then when we went to actually purchase, my wife held the Sig and she didn't like it, and I had asked you, right? And you know, I love what you talk about. What's the most commonly used, you know, kind of ammo, which 9mm, and a gun that never fails, which is the Glock, right? And
Yeah.
so that was the first weapon that we purchased, and then it's funny because we've gotten others, but the one that is really the most comfortable and the most accurate is that Glock.
Yeah, it's amazing. And if you upgrade the Glock trigger and you upgrade the sights, which 99.99% of the people have to, because everyone hates the Glock standard trigger. It just that's the way they make it. But I even have a Glock. One of the first guns I ever owned, even gosh, going back to when I was a prosecutor, um, And I had to go take the concealed weapons course just to carry a firearm into the building, um, because we had a very liberal elected state attorney, and he wasn't pro gun at all, but he didn't forbid us. He just said, if you want to bring a gun to work, you have to go take this course, get certified, show me your license, and then I'll pen a letter saying that you were allowed to have this in the building. Because obviously, as a prosecutor, you want to protect yourself as well, walking to and from your car. Um, Knock on wood, I never had an issue like that, thank God as well. But um, it's interesting. I have a Glock. I recommend Glock all the time. My everyday carry is a Glock 43X, and I put the shield mags into it. I put the metal mag release that goes with the metal, so now I can carry 15 rounds in a little 43X, and I absolutely love it. Um, but I know people that want the Sig 365 macro double comp pro, Spectre gold trigger. Man, you do you. One of the guys I trained with, he's awesome. John DeFresney. He's like, you do you, boo. So that's what I tell people. You know, I can only guide you, and I'm not a salesperson. I never make any money on any opinion I give to people, ever, ever, ever. Nor do I want to. So it's completely unbiased. But I tell them, if you don't shoot like I shoot, or you don't like what I like, man, don't get what I got. You do you.
And making the case that it's such a big world to step into, which is why you want to do your research, why you want
Yeah.
to take your time. I want to I just thought about this because you and I had this conversation before I ever owned one. And that was the belief of, because again, the media sensationalizes terrible things, right? And it's, I have little kids in the home, and you hear all the time, accidents happen. So therefore, I don't want to have a gun in the house. But you would always tell me what you would do with your son when he was little, and
Yeah.
you've owned
Yeah.
weapons since he's been alive. So
Way before he's alive.
yeah.
Yeah.
So talk about, because I remember the conversation vividly. Talk about what you did raising children and
Yeah.
and having a gun in the house.
Yeah, I wish my son was here because he could probably recite to you exactly what I told him when he was a kid as well. He's still only 17, and let me tell you, he's a great shot. That kid can handle a firearm very as safer than some of the adults I've been in training classes with, hands down. I love the kid, not because he's my son, but man, he's taken to the training and he understands it and he respects it, and that's a key word too,
Well,
John.
that I was just
People,
about to say,
yeah,
it's the having
yeah,
the respect. Absolutely.
yeah. And I bred that respect in him early. And I always told him, and I don't recommend you tell this to your kids. This is what I told my kids. I always told my son, if you ever touch my gun, or you ever let anyone touch my gun, I will break your hand. I will literally break your hand. You don't touch it. It's not a toy. Because my son had Nerf toys, but I told him it is not a toy. It is daddy's. It is to protect you and mommy. It's dangerous. You don't touch it. And you certainly don't ever touch it unless I am there with you and you see me clear it. And I think I taught this to him at like 4 years old, John. I literally showed him how I make the gun safe and I clear it. And just what I do with students now, I show them, say, see, empty. And I would show him no magazine, no bullet in the chamber. And I would make him parrot it back to me. Yep, empty. So I taught him as soon as he could probably even hold even a small, tiny pistol, exactly that you never touch a firearm at that age unless I'm there and I show you it's unloaded and you can parrot it back to me that it's unloaded and you see it, because that's the second rule that I teach people gun safety is you treat every gun as it's loaded. Because if I'm with you at a range and you unload it and I watch you unload it and I watch you clear your slide to make sure there's no ammo in it, you hand it to me and that slide is closed, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press check, make sure you got that slide all the way back and extracted any bullet over there. Like we'll call it the Alec Baldwin bullet, right?
Well,
Let's
I'm going
make
to
sure
talk
there's
about,
nothing in
I
that
was just,
gun.
I want to talk about that after.
Yeah.
I do
Oh
want to
yeah.
talk about that.
But you always have to check the firearm. Just because somebody says, "Hey man, here's my firearm, it's unloaded," you better make sure that there's no bullets in that gun. Take the magazine out, check yourself. Even if you just watch them, like John, I trust you wholeheartedly, and I could watch you clear your firearm. But unless you clear it, hold it open, and show it to me and say, "Look here, empty," right? And I go, "Yep, empty." I'm going to check it myself just to make sure. I'll give you a real quick story before we get to the next topic on that. But I represented a doctor here in South Florida who was proficient in pistols, had bought an AR-15, had never owned one, had shot it before, fairly safe. He didn't train with me. I met him, after this incident happened because he hired me. He was cleaning the firearm in his home, and he took the magazine out and he pulled the charging handle back, but he didn't pull it all the way back, and he never checked. So there was still
Mm.
a 223 round in that barrel. And as you know, when you take apart that top of that AR-15, the trigger will engage. And it actually dropped before he could take the AR-15 apart. He shot a round through his door, across his hall, into his neighbor's house,
Oh my
where it
gosh.
broke some. Yeah, thank God they weren't home, and thank God if the gun was facing the other direction, his elderly father was in a room in the other room, and he called me panicking, thinking, "Oh my God, the police are on their way. I just discharged a firearm negligently. Thank goodness nobody was hurt on the other side." But I was able to step in and talk to management, talk to the neighbor, made sure no charges were filed, made sure that he was protected. He didn't lose his job. He didn't lose his weapons permit. Um, but it's, again, you don't know what you don't know, and accidents do happen. And all he had to do was pull back a little bit harder and check, and he didn't. He just assumed it was empty and clear, and he could have ended up killing someone. And then that conversation would have been very different about the rest of his life.
And that's the kind of stuff where I think it detracts people from owning a weapon, right? Because of the laws of accidents and all that other stuff. So what is your answer to, it was an accident, right? Like obviously it could have been,
Completely.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
but you've got to train. You've got to train, and you've got to respect the firearm rules of safety. He all he had to do was look. All he had to do was pull all the way back, and even with an AR-15, you can actually lock the BCM back. You can lock it all the way back open, and then be able to look in there and see. Oh, there's brass. I can see the brass clearly. There's still a projectile in there. Um, it was just his lack of training. Honestly, that's all it was. It was his lack of not knowing how to break down that weapon and double check and really make sure it's safe. And he thought it was safe. He had perfectly good intentions. I mean, for Pete's sake, he's a professional, never been arrested, never been charged in his life. I mean, complete accident. But again, when you own a firearm, you have to be prepared to take responsibility of every bullet that comes out of that gun, and that is 100% on you to train. And there's a great saying I learned a few months ago, and it's fantastic when it comes to firearms. And it said, "You will never rise to the occasion. You will always fall to the
to your
level of your
habits.
training."
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And they use it as training for that. And that's what I tell people. If you train and train and train and train, you become subconscious competent. You'll know to double check and make sure that barrel's clear. But if you've only done it two or three times and you really haven't been trained on it, you haven't ingrained it in yourself, that's when accidents happen.
Yeah, it's just talking to you we need to do more. And I'm saying this to all the listeners, right? Yes, we own firearms, but we don't know half as much as we need to know. Not that we're running around being reckless, right? We
Right.
know that,
Correct.
safety basics, but like I love what you said. There's always another level, and you really do fall to the level of your training or your habits. So I think it's really good. So anything more you want to say on just raising kids with weapons in the house?
Well, obviously have safes involved. In my house, I have multiple safes in multiple rooms. I have them downstairs, upstairs. You never know where you're going to be. Every night I take a gun out of my safe and I put it out, and that's my gun every single night in case something happens. And my son always knew when he was younger, I wouldn't even let my son go down the hallway without announcing himself. And that started even when he was younger. If my son, once we got rid of the baby monitor, if my son wanted to leave his room, he would have to call out to me or my wife and say, "Hey, I have to go to the bathroom. Hey, can I get a drink?" Because God forbid, we all, everybody talks about that nightmare scenario, John. I woke up in the middle of the night and it sounded like somebody was breaking in, and I saw a shadow and I drew my gun and I pop, pop, I shot, and then now it's a loved one. Or
Right.
it's somebody coming home in the middle of the night that was out drinking and you thought they were already home, and now you kill someone you love. So that was part of my safety with my child is, don't come out of your room or walk around the house without announcing that you're there, because then now mommy and daddy know, okay, it's just our son, or it's so and so. I think you have to put that plan in place when you get a firearm. Where are your safes? Who has the codes to them? Make sure it's safe. Make sure the children can never be around when the safes are open or when the gun is there. And educate your children that this is not a toy. This is not for you to touch, look at, anything. I must be there with you. And I think my son really responded to that, where I didn't tell him, "You better never touch it and hold it." It was, "Don't ever touch it unless I give it to you." and I show you it's safe. See, and let me show you what I do. And then I gave it to my son and I let him hold my pistol. And I same thing. I wouldn't let him aim it at people. I wouldn't let him aim it at. I told him you have to keep it in a safe direction. So it comes to your training and it comes to repetition over and over. You ingrain safety and responsibility. Just like if you want to raise a good human being in today's world, you ingrain responsibility and you ingrain that over and over and that consistency in their head. And then next thing you know, even though we all have kids and we all have teenagers, you don't think they're listening, they're really listening. They just
Yeah.
act like they didn't listen.
Right. All right. So, I didn't even think about having this conversation with you, but it had come up, right? So you're a defense attorney and you're a gun advocate, and then the Alec Baldwin case happens, right?
Yeah.
So I'd love to know, your thoughts on it, and because you said something that just tripped it in my mind. He was the producer of the movie. He is
Yeah.
responsible, right?
Yep. Yep. Ultimately, he's at the top of the chain. And now they've actually found emails. Well, they were telling the armorer that she's spending too much time on gun safety. She needs to maintain other things. She has other parts of her job she should focus on. So there's going to be some interesting things at trial that come out if it goes to trial. And I was actually on Newsmax with John Bachman when it first happened. I've known John when he was at the local Channel 12 here in West Palm Beach. He knows my history with guns and training, and he brought me on. And it was interesting. There's this big time defense attorney from New York. Then there's me from South Florida. And that attorney took the position of Alex never going to get charged. His lawyers are going to step in. And I was like, well, that whole, not so fast. I read New Mexico's law on involuntary manslaughter and some of the other homicide charges. And the way their involuntary manslaughter law read was perfectly designed for what happened with Alec Baldwin. And the fact that Alec then went out there on this PR campaign, which whoever told him to do this should be fired. I mean, he should sue them. It was the worst advice ever to go on national TV and give an interview and say you were not responsible for any of it and you never pulled the trigger. Are you kidding me? Those guns are single action Army guns, John. They do not fire unless that trigger is pulled. So I was the one that originally said he needs to look out for this charge. And sure enough, as soon as it came down, I got a call from Newsmax. They're like, listen, can you be on in 4 hours? Alec Baldwin is getting charged. I'm like, bring me on. Absolutely. And I took it as a victory lap because everybody thought I was crazy. And I was the only one saying that there's some serious charges he could face.
What the thing that I keep asking is, number one, what was Live Rounds doing on a movie set? Like, what is the reason for a live round to be on a movie set?
And let me answer that. And even with John Wick, even with every movie that's out there prior to this happening, they use real firearms. These are not prop firearms. They are just as heavy. They are complete legit weapons. What they do, and even during filming, actors will actually go practice and shoot scenes, not shoot scenes, but they'll shoot the firearms prior to the scenes. I apologize, with live ammo, so they can see the reaction, they can hear it, they can see if they're aiming in the right direction. So you will have live ammo on a production set of a movie where they're using it at an off location. That live ammo is never supposed to make it to the actual film set day. It's supposed to be all blanks. But everybody thinks, well, you're not even supposed to have real guns. Oh no, every gun you've ever seen in a movie, with the exception of maybe, they don't have the budget for it, are real guns that fire real bullets. But you see in the movie, they're firing blanks because they still, and even those blanks, John, just so you know, they propel a serious amount of gas where if your hand is in front of it, you'll get injured. If you're close to that blast, you will be injured. And I guarantee you, there's been times in movies where you've had stuntmen or actors severely injured, even with a blank being firing close to their face, their body, their hair, whatever it is. So there's still a propellant that comes out. Now, again, was there supposed to be live ammunition on set that day that they were filming? Of course not. The armorer in this case really has an uphill battle on her criminal charge. I think they're going to try to use mitigation for the emails that were somehow leaked. I'm sure her attorneys leaked them intentionally. But you're right. No live ammo should ever be on the filming day set. It should only be at a secure location, like in a lock safe or a trailer of that armorer. only to be used when actually doing live fire offset, non-filming.
Well, I just learned something. I didn't even know that they were real guns, and
Yeah.
you can probably see it up here, right? Like I've got two replicas of lightsabers, right? I just know that when I
Yeah.
turn the button, right, nothing's coming out because it doesn't really, but they feel like it. You know what I mean?
Well, in the movies, that gun right there is a real gun. That would be used in a cowboy movie right there.
Yeah,
They'd use it. They would put blanks in there, but they would use that firearm. So a lot of movie producers and a lot of people in Hollywood said, "Hey, moving forward, we are not going to use any real gun on set. It will only be a prop gun." So some film industry people have gone that way, but man, for decades and decades and decades, it's been real firearms being used by real actors. It's
yeah,
not CGI and all those events. Now, hitting things and shooting people, those are clearly
right,
effects and
right.
using props. But they're still using real life firearms that work, functioning firearms in the movie.
Yeah, and if you're, look, and I think you just really, um, I'm learning so much, Corey, just talking to you today, right? That if we're going to purchase, because this whole episode has been right, our rights and owning firearms, and you said if we own it, it's our responsibility, right? And you just taught me that on
Yeah.
movie sets, they're real firearms. So clearly, if you're going to have them on set, there's a responsibility there that every person is held accountable to.
And that includes the actor. The actors are supposed to verify it. Just like if I handed you an empty gun, your responsibility is to verify that it's empty. So when Alec got that firearm, his responsibility was look, because the bullets that they use for blanks, they have primers in it, but they are not marked like they are with live ammo. They're completely different. Those blanks are handmade. They're actually prepared and created for the movies. So it's not going to be like a set of Federal 9 millimeters, or it's not going to be a Winchester, 410 bullet, or a 4.5 a long 4.5 long Colt that was probably in that gun. It's going to be marked differently, so you'd be able to look at it if you're trained and responsible enough. And that goes into Alec bit himself a little bit with karma because he's always been anti-gun and you shouldn't have a gun and guns are bad and we don't need guns. Well, he admits that he has no training with guns, no history with guns, no knowledge of guns, no education of guns, other than what they hand him on set. He may not even have the knowledge, John, to look in that revolver and be like, "Hey, wait a minute, that is a Winchester bullet that is marked. That's what I've been firing over live ammo. That's not the blank ammo I've been firing this whole movie." So Alec is going to be in a little bit of trouble because what's he going to do? Get on there and say he has all this education and knowledge and background and experience and he checked the gun? He didn't. And he's admitted on TV time and time again that people shouldn't own guns. They shouldn't use guns. Well, he doesn't have any guns, right? He can't sit there and say John
Right.
and Cory can't own a gun, but he's got guns at his house, right? So you'd have to assume he doesn't own firearms.
Something that just came to mind. We hear it all the time, and like I shared, we can go on and on, right? And but we've got to kind of bring this home. But
Sure.
I think the thing that I really got very present to, you started our time together with talking about freedom. And freedom does come with responsibility, right? Otherwise, if you're not responsible with freedom, you can't handle it, and it's not freely given. It's just kind of one of those. I want people to get that, Corey. I mean, you and I, we've known each other a while, and I know you know what I stand for, right? If we're going to be men, if we're going to be productive in society, if we're going to have, like, having a family is being responsible, right? I mean, you're in you've seen the criminal system, what it is to be responsible and not responsible, right?
Yeah.
And all this whole conversation is the difference between diligent and responsible to being lazy and negligent. And like you said, we've become so entitled that we're not even thinking about what we're thinking about. We don't even know that we don't know because we don't take the time to actually know in the first place.
And we take it for granted, John. So many people think, well, I'm just anti gun, so no one should have a gun. And they don't realize if you look at the countries and societies where the populace has been disarmed, Look at the freedoms they no longer have. You talk to anybody in Australia and England, and you ask the common citizen man if you had a chance to get your gun rights back right now, every single one of them would say yes. Same thing in South Africa. I know a gentleman who was in the South African army, and even there, he ran a security company. And John, I believe you probably know who I'm referring to.
Hmm.
Um, Michael owned his own security company, and in South Africa, the common citizen, if somebody breaks into your house, you can't even shoot at them. They have to shoot at you first. Then you have to return one bullet, and you can't shoot anymore unless they shoot at you again. And that is the most asinine thing I've ever heard. How am I, as a man, supposed to protect my family, my livelihood, my wife, my children, especially against multiple attackers? Am I only allowed to shoot at the guy that was shooting at me? What if he has three others that have a machete? Do I have to wait for him to hit me with his machete before I shoot? Like, these laws make no sense. And I don't care if people want to call me a chauvinist. I don't care. I could care less about people's opinions. The thing I hold as a core value, I am a man. My job in this world is to be a provider and a protector of my family. The minute I took a wife, the minute I gave vows to my wife and we had a child and we created a family, nobody had to tell me that it was my responsibility. I told myself that. And that's where we're losing it is we go back to being a man, and a man is responsibility, it's respect, and it's honor. You honor what you were put on this planet for, to be a provider and a protector. Because again, like you said earlier, you take away the men, real easy to control a society really fast, because all you have is women and children. And in the history of the world, you show me a society that was built, that lasted centuries, where it was only the women and children were the providers and the protectors and went and fought wars. It still doesn't happen in today. Even today, men have to go into the selective service, even though we don't have a draft. Women are exempt. I thought we were here to have equal rights, right? Whole other podcast. But our role as a man is to be responsible, respectful, and honor not only our true selves, but you better honor your family, and honoring them is protecting them.
And not being able to, and now I mean, again, we could go on and on, right? But not upholding that honor, right? So and I think you and I think the reason why I do this podcast and the things that I do is because I think Gen X was the last of this idea of what you're talking about before media and social media really started to program our society in a different way. But again, that is a whole other podcast,
Yeah.
right? But I knew at 27 years old, if the shit hits the fan, I don't know what to do. And it is my responsibility. Nobody had to tell me. It was my responsibility to take care of my wife. I stood before God and her father and said, I will provide, protect, etc. Those things are indisputable as men. We are divinely created and innate. It's innate. It's wired into us. And I think the when the poser says, because the whole premise of Man Up is that men really do question whether or not they have what it takes. And that's okay. That's normal. But
Yeah.
take the steps like you're talking about. Seek out guides, the power of your posse. Surround you. I'm so grateful that you're in my posse, right? Like,
Yeah.
because I value who you are, how you show up. You are everything that I talk about in the Man Up Already, just community and mindset. That we've got to take responsibility. We've got to take the steps necessary to do the things that we need to do, and stop listening to the media and stop listening to opinion, and step back into what is innately built inside of us and get educated. And it's just, there's so much in this. It's not about, right, guns are cool, they're manly,
Right.
and all that other
Right.
crap. That's just sensationalizing something, right? I'll never forget. We have you ever seen Tulsa King? Do you watch that at all?
I do not.
Sylvester Stallone. It's such an
I
awesome.
have heard about. I
Oh,
have heard
yeah.
about it, but I haven't watched it.
It's so great. It really is well done. It's the guy who did Yellowstone, which I'm a big fan of that whole. But he does Tulsa King, and so he's with. Here you got 75-year-old, the character of Stallone, who's a mafia guy, and you got this young, African American, 20-year-old kid, and so they're both holding a gun, and the young kid, he's like doing this, with the gun, and Stallone's like, it doesn't work like that. Like, what are you doing? You look like an idiot. You know what I mean? It doesn't. The physics don't add up, right? And it was just this big joke of what you see is not reality, right?
Not
And
even close.
real. It was such a funny scene. Like, what are you doing? It doesn't even work that way.
I can imagine, and it's
Uh,
actually out there. It's people will go out there and believe what they see, and like you said, going back to what you just said a few moments ago, even our children now are being desensitized and programmed in school that the word toxic masculinity. How about just the word toxic in general? There is no such thing as toxic masculinity. There is toxicity. There
mhm.
are bad traits that somebody, but women can be violent. We have women murderers. We have women serial killers. We have women rapists. I mean, so you can't say that a man's masculinity is toxic at all. It doesn't exist. Our masculinity as is what built this world, created this world, and it's why we have what we have now. If it wasn't for that masculinity, we would still all be slaves. We would still all be fighting battles and not owning any land. We would still have kings and queens and tyrants.
We
It's
wouldn't be a
because of that
country.
masculinity. No, never, not even close. We would never have these rights. So, and that's worldwide. So I hate that. The one thing that the generation now has to understand, especially young men, and this goes out to anybody under the age of 30 that's listening. There's no such thing as toxic masculinity. Don't let anyone ever say that about you or even use that word. There are toxic traits that humans possess, male and female, and non binary nonsense, kitty cat, dog people, whatever. But then there's masculinity, and true masculinity is that provider, that protector, the person that honors, cherishes, and abides by
Love that.
what human nature holds. And that's that honor and respect, John.
That
That
is
is
true. I love what you
masculinity.
just, that
Yeah,
is
yeah,
true masculinity. I love that. It's so, it
100%.
again, right? It's sensationalizing the absurd, right? And getting it to be, normal, when in reality, the things that are actually real, um, and it again goes back to divine creation, right? It goes back
Yeah,
to there is a divine design to all of us. And those are the things that are getting pushed into the category of bad,
right, right.
right?
Because
And
God created man and woman. He
right,
created us who we are in the way we are, and this is who we are. You can't change that. We are wired differently because we have different chromosomes. We're supposed to be different. If we were the same, we wouldn't be able to procreate. We were completely created in God's eye to do exactly what we've done. And again, without getting too political, you cannot control a society unless you can get rid of the strong males. How do you defeat a lion's pride, John? You take out the lion. And then what does that new lion do? He kills all of the cubs and takes over all of the women. And that's the easiest way to take over a society. And these young men have got to stop it. And it's their generation. It's not ours.
yeah,
It is
agree.
not your and my fight anymore. It's your sons and my sons' fight. And everybody who's listening, you raise a son, you teach them to be masculine, to honor, respect, and obey, and that you honor that responsibility to be a provider and a protector. And that's a man's job. Again, going back to divine creation, John.
I love it. I love it. Corey, how do people find you, access you? I don't, you bring such value on people to be able to just follow what you're doing and learn from you.
Well, the only social media I am on is Instagram, and it's at Strolla Law. So it's my last name and then LAW Strolla Law. I try to stay away from social media. I like going on there and making liberals mad, and that's why I'm kicked off of Facebook. But that's a whole different podcast. I do have Twitter, Strolla Law as well. But they can contact me by calling my law office. And especially if you're in Florida and you want training, that's the easiest thing to do is call my law office and say, hey, this is what I'm interested in with Mr. Strolla, and I'll have a conversation. And the nice thing, what I do, which kind of separates me, not only am I a firearms trainer with experience, but I'm also an attorney that handles firearms laws and criminal cases. but the fact that I can custom tailor my programs to every single student, like I would never train you the same way I would train that 73-year-old lady who's never handled a firearm.
Right.
So I don't have cookie cutter. Everyone's like, oh, well, how come you don't have a website with your training? Because I don't do cookie cutter training. Every training I give is 100% custom designed for the student. Whether I have one student or five students, it is literally customized for every single class I do.
Awesome. Okay. Well, it has been an honor and a privilege and a pleasure, my friend,
Ditto, brother.
to have
Ditto.
you on here. I want to talk to you about some other things for sure, but I love what you're doing. I love what you stand for. You're such a good dude. You represent everything here that we talk about. So thank you for your friendship, and thanks for being such a great guest.
I'm honored.